of the Virgin Islands, nor Guyana, or Haiti, or Aruba, and I apologize for Alida, who has a very important work which I respect, as well as her journalist work. I'm going to talk about these counter models and or during the 3 decades. And when I talk about the Greater Caribbean, I'm not only referring to the geographical space, both in terms of island and continental space, but I'm talking about the sociocultural space. I also want to clarify something else. I'm referring to artists and historians, but I do not exclude male artists because it's not a prerequisite, a female prerequisite to break up models and molds. Male artists also did this, though in another way, maybe less systematized, but very interesting also. An example of this were the project known by the multiple footprint or the raid or introduced in Colombia or the Quinta Pata group in Dominican Republic. There are multiple female artistic practices in the Greater Caribbean in the 1980s, and they have prevailed over certain structures implicitly linked to the common history since the consequences of slavery, dictatorship, armed conflicts, the Colombian guerrilla, the Cold War, patriarchy, male chauvinism, sexual tourism. More recently, but in the 80s, there was also sexual tourism and the invisibility of women. There are presidents like Celeste Bosch in Dominican Republic or Maria Luisa Penedel Castillo in Puerto Rico or Cecilia Porras in Colombia. Very daring and untamed women. They vindicate their role in arts and their acknowledgement. They provide support of their work. We are going to talk about textile work because this traditional and handicraft that has been changing for other presumptions. I was talking about these three women who vindicated their own individuality, and I think Louise Bourgeois and Ana Mendieta are also very interesting artists. Ana Mendieta with subversive works related to the body and nature and rural art, where she can integrate nature in a spiritual manner. Can we go back one slide? Though Beatriz Gonzalez not, she has been in Cartagena, but she's not from the Colombian Caribbean. It's interesting because she reflected on pop art, a critical reflection, and she goes back to Colombian roots. She was not interested in the popular nature of the what is called the local. She criticizes the new trends on the one hand, but also the roots. Marta Travada was called a provincial painter, and she was not critic about her. She just wanted to highlight that with this work, she had gone beyond all female productions of the time. One of the Eurocentric models prevailing for centuries was the representation of musas. I have been searching about this representation, and little by little uh, she is very far from Ana Mendieta's Musa, the Black Venus, but she conceives her body as a portrayer of codes. And between 2004 and 2007, it is quite unusual to see this transformation in the art of this female artist. And this work, Trans Corpus. No, not that one. Among these female vindications, we have the access to body as the receiver of subversiveness, as is the case of Tania Bruguera. In paying homage to Ana Mendieta, or the weight of the blame. There is a convergence of concept between Tania Bruguera and Ana Mendieta. Tania Bruguera was quite subversive during those years. Syncretic cults were also a source of inspiration for photographs. These are seen in photographs by Marta Morocho and Maria Perez in works that are a little bit traditional. We can also see the domestic shores thanks to materials that she weaves or unweaves. These are installations regarding the fusion of art and handicraft work, and a conceptual hybridization between house chores and the subjugation that this work means, represented by the rope, which is not present in this photograph. She also used in her work sensitive states. Ada Bobonis has evolved conceptually We can also see other visual proposals, daring visual proposals, like Ruby Rumier, who was part of Introvitus in Colombia, in Cartagena, Colombia, or Ofelia Rodriguez with her magic box. She lived a long time in England. The representation of her country has always been very present. She uses animals of the Colombian Caribbean, like the crocodile. Olivia Miranda had an exhibition in a Havana Biennial. I saw one of her works at the San Alejandro School of Art. It's interesting because she shows her experiences with perceptible narratives where texture are not the representation but the support of the work, the basis. This slide has no title. You can see what shared horizons announced. But one has to be careful because there are formal similitudes, but they don't have the same genesis. To the left, for example, we have a Mexican, of whom I'm going to talk later on. Then we have a Colombian, Olivia Miranda. And to the right, a Dominican Republic artist, Raquel Payemonsky, who you all know. The way of expressing herself or themselves, though using textile, is based on different life experiences, and the message is not exactly the same, though there are shared horizons among them. I'm not going to talk much about this. Teresa Sanchez, though much deserved, is an artist that uses the sense of, she uses the needle, which is a sexual symbol, and her representation of the river with wood that comes from the same region in Colombia. And I think that Colombian artists have this inner thought of representing their own territory as a social cultural territory, because Cartagena was a very important port in the times of slavery, and at the same time, because I wondered why they have this common thing, and I think, and this is my opinion, that this could be the result of the Garcia Marquez in the Colombian Caribbean, because he used his life experiences, his childhood experiences, to write his novel that won him the Nobel Prize. This could be an explanation. I don't say that it is the only explanation we can give to the fact that they all have this in common. Daisy Morelos is more daring. When she says the color I am, she is referring to the colors of the Colombian population. But we see, and though here we have a horizontal proposal, while most of her work is vertical work with the colors of skin, we see that the forms are
La violencia que existe.
like coffins, making reference to the violence in Colombia and the violence in arts. Recently, she said there has been a dictatorship of vision in plastic art. And based on this dictatorship of the vision, she used or she claimed the colors and the smells and sensations as a way of building or construing European and American models. Wasn't there a previous slide? No, okay. Raquel Pajewonsky, who has a huge dress in the other museum, also worked on embroidery and sewing. Most of the time, her dresses are related with religion or the dressing rituals with materials that we can find in our everyday life, like the ones we see in this work. Materials that she transforms because initially artists use natural textiles like cotton, linen, but there has been an evolution because they understood that their language could be misunderstood. So that is why they began using synthetic material because they thought this were more convincing. These are dresses that are like an aggression against women. And in her Manto de Ojos, I think this is a work that belongs to an important period in her work because it's like a summary of her prior works and anticipates her future works, like the celestial dresses, like the Inopia embroidery. That pose a problem regarding intimacy with this multiplicity of breasts that she has embroidered and places throughout the whole work. This could, to a certain extent, mean a duality between virginity and a less evident concept of sexuality. Inés Tolentino, also Dominican, she gives us a reflection regarding her context and her origins. She has a double personality. She's French and Dominican, and when she arrived in Dominican Republic, she was not able to understand because these were difficult times. There was a dictatorship, and she was afraid. She thought that she would not be able to understand the context, and that is why she has this work that reflect ostracism, denial of roots, cultural, social, and racial roots. She also deals with childhood, as many Dominicans do. A disturbed childhood, an aggressive childhood. This is a series. She represents girls who killed the pig, metaphorically speaking. Another artist we mentioned this morning is Jorge Pineda. They dealt with similar themes, and he was part of the Quinta Pata group. He has always been interested and concerned with the lives of boys and girls, the as he called them, the red girls that remind us of his forest work. And the hoods hide the face, and in hiding the face, they multiplied the number of girls in this situation, these fragile human beings to which Pineda makes allusion. He says that this was a way of finding elements that nurture me, that connect me, and to which I can commit. With the title The Owners, dolls that were collected, he acquired a gender consciousness, and with the good humor, the roles are inverted. The This is they have this note saying very nice, very pretty, ugly, etc. So it's like them, women talking about men. Another artist from Martinica, Alex Burke, also worked with these dolls, but he his theme is the collective memory during the colonization. We go back to Marcela Diaz. We saw one of her dresses, the one that was at the left, who also deals with childhood. This is a very peculiar theme, not only for females, also for male artists. She participates with this work, and she is using
decir en aquel momento, yo me
this plant. She says it's not only one identity, there are multiple identities in the Caribbean. And I identify myself with this plant because I'm from Yucatan. And I thought this was very interesting. I thought her vision was very interesting. Here we have two works by Patricia Belli from Nicaragua. You can say Nicaragua is not the Caribbean, but I said that I'm also interested in the continental strips of the Caribbean. And she has made a very important work on reflection, representing the Virgin Sizzle. She equates the female issue with religion. And this can be seen in several other artists. El Alcance, the scope, is another work that shows perceptions and lives of women cannot be expressed. It's like they are always in cages. Now we'll analyze another type of work. Some Dominican and Cuban artists like Belkisa Young, how they break away from the traditional engraving. Becky Ramirez did this in wood. This is a number of photos that are the target of a violence that can be unleashed when you start throwing stones. So there is a duality between these photos or drawings or portraits and the most natural objects like stones and
Fling.
and
Fling. Asleep. Fling.
slings. She has made engraving a fundamental part of her installation. It's not only drawing but engraving and how this is linked to her works. From bad to worse, this morning we were talking about playing with words, and Belkis liked this very much. She has a painting that says, called marcadas, which means marked, but the mar is sea in Spanish, and it was the sea that brought the slaves and the condition of dominated women that were used as merchandise. I'm trying to go quicker. We also have the work of Belkis Ayong. I'm interested in these works by Belkis because she deals with a theme linked to rituals, and this has made me remind me of Ana Mendieta with her silhouette within a frame, erotic frame. Next. It's also interesting to see her circle engraving. She is making a narration of the Circan myth. And when she says, "Let me go out," it reminds me of other artists who place their female characters within cages or boxes. The sentence, la sentencia, the interesting thing of this is the meticulous work of Belkis Ayong. All these environment of so many black people, what she's seeking and achieving is that we can see different languages within the same engraving. Sandra Ramos was also part of the multiple footprint, together with Belkisa Ayong and Abel Barroso. Each of them shows their forms and ways. Sandra, has done this with a lot of humor. We always have this duality between humor and seriousness. This is about migration. It's also interesting to see how she will paint on mirrors and glasses. The childhood theme can be seen from outside and from inside. And the text can also be seen upside down. It's like a psychological mirror. I think I'm lost here. Valerie John is from Martinique, and she also works on the theme of myths. Belkis Ayong also, but not in the same way. Valerie John does not work on engraving. She compiles or piles up several ¿cómo se dice?
De las mujeres son los que conforman
Several layers one over the other that conform the different identities of the Caribbean. She is working on the African myth that has not been well understood, and she is working on that using indigo, which is blue color, though she's not representing blue, but very dark colors that she relates with the color of the skin and the oppressions during the colonization period. She works on collective memory and not individual memory or personal memory. And Julie Bessard from Martinique, who also whose work are also on the transportation or movement of persons. And though she presented some grids, it's not with the same dramatic tone of Belly's tone. I'm thinking, this reminds me of Belkis Ramirez also. For the woman and for the artist, it's very difficult to reject, though they all do it, to reject what has been part of them since childhood. So Besar is younger. She has a different dynamic in the way she expresses herself. Maybe she's a little bit more optimistic than what she usually represents. I want to talk
Hablar de las historiadoras y críticas.
about the historians.
Que esta mañana
Because, very briefly, because earlier this morning, Jose Manuel did what I has said, what I wanted to say about Yolanda Wood, so I don't think I need to add anything. Yolanda knows the Caribbean better than anyone else, and she has very important theoretical body of work. Earlier this morning, she was referring to her first book in the 1990s, which was the book that unleashed his theoretical work on art in the Caribbean. And as of that time, she began giving lectures in several conferences. She began teaching and giving several master courses, and she was very helpful at a time where there was no connection among the various countries in the Caribbean. She was instrumental in disseminating and spreading knowledge about the arts in the Caribbean. Another important historian who was mentioned by Jorge yesterday is Miriam Janes, because without Lilian Janes, the biennial wouldn't exist and wouldn't be what it is today. Not only she did all the work of the biennial, but also wrote about the biennials, how she became involved in biennials, and what was said about the role of biennials. I would like to say that Elena Pellegrini, when she talks about the Havana Biennial, said that Belkis Ramirez's career wouldn't have been possible without the Havana Biennial, because she was in a biennial and that marked her work and career forever. And that is just an example. We could name many more. And this is about two historians, and I'm going very quickly, but we should not forget a very controversial historian, Marta Trava, the Colombian Marta Trava, and she's the one who said that Rodriguez was a provincial painter, but Marta Trava helped young artists of the Caribbean a lot, and particularly of the Colombian Caribbean. I also want to mention Virginia Perez Gaton because although we don't hear much about her nowadays, but she did very important work to raise the visibility of artists of Central America and the Caribbean, particularly central topics of Central America, this desire for a place, and she succeeded, although as a theoretician she didn't have much room for maneuvering, but the space was welcoming for artists, and it was a space for them to publish, and that was highly appreciated to have the opportunity of publishing. I also want to mention Marianne de Tolentino because she knows Dominican art better than anyone, and she knows the art of the Caribbean very much. Perhaps she's not so familiar with Cuban art, but she knows about the Caribbean in general. She published several books and catalogs that allow for the search of information on this topic. And finally, I will talk about Sarah Herman from the Leon Center from the Dominican Republic, that with the support and sponsorship of this center, Leon Center, she was able to curate several exhibitions of Caribbean art or arts. It's best to use the plural. And she wrote several publications. She had previously worked in the Museum of Modern Art of Santo Domingo. And when the Leon Center, she was one of its curators, and then she became a very renowned figure. And I will talk about Dominique Trebion from Martinique, who was the president or chair of ICA, and who I should have elaborated on the first years of the 21st century, but she's doing some important work with virtual or online art journals, and that is very useful for artists and for students also, and critics in general. I think it. So I thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too long. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the audience? If you wish to take the floor, please go to a microphone because I cannot see very well. Well, if there are no questions, I wanted to thank Michel Dalmate for this inventory of artists, creators, and female creators and inventors and reinventors of art production, and new ways of discussing the topics that have interested us all. I think it is no coincidence that Michel has selected a segment of that production from the 1980s to the present, because it was actually in the 1980s that the Caribbean and Latin America was when this topics became more visible. And this, particularly the struggle against the mainstream patriarchal system and political power, that also has an impact in the circulation of art and her presentation. She also made reference to curators and critics that accompanied and gave voice to these artists and works. So the identity of difference was not only important, but the fact that these critics and curators accompanied this process in the 1960s and 1970s with feminism, these different ways of portraying ourselves started, but only with the support of curators and critics, this was possible. And now we will have a panel of curators who will talk about female art in Puerto Rico. As Yolanda said earlier today, they're not only curators, but managers and producers and artists by female artists themselves. And when we look at the history of Latin American arts, and particularly in Cuba, we can recall two artists came to my mind, and they're very contemporary, Saya del Rio and Jacqueline May, who are two Cuban artists of the 1970s who were thinking in terms of gender and were producing from a feminine identity that wanted to portray itself as different and not necessarily as an antagonic, and was subdued in the official narrative that never made a distinction between the work of these artists and the rest of the works of their contemporaries. So that's why I'm very glad that at the end of your presentation you talk about the support of critics. And I apologize because I'm only mentioning Cuban artists, but that's but I can also talk about Antonia Eiris, who back in the 1960s in Cuba was doing work that was very strong, with a spirit that was contrary to the general feeling of its contemporaries, and only with well supported and grounded critics and curators that elaborate on the actual meaning of this production is how we can make all these differences visible. These multicultural contexts in which the art of feminist artists was produced back in the 1960s and 1970s marks the work not only of female artists nowadays, but of all artists in general. I think it was a turning point in the in art history what feminist artists did in that postmodern multicultural context. But perhaps we should acknowledge these are not no struggles. These struggles have lasted for centuries and have names and last names. In the Cuban case, perhaps we could go back also to Latin America, 1920s of the last century. We had the first feminist conference, the first Latin American Congress of Women in 1923, and then we had two more conferences. That means that as early as that day to have a conference of that nature, there was a tradition before. But in Latin America, there was a lot more tradition than in the Caribbean, but at least it was best known. Actually, last year in the Museum of Modern Art of Mexico City, they were commemorating the anniversary of the feminist movement in Mexico and the action of the suffragettes. So this is nothing new. This is not fashion, but this is a cyclic process that emerges and re-emerges out of need and tradition. Thank you. So now I invite my Puerto Rican colleagues.
Voy a alcanzar el agua para que se...
Lo tengo al final en orden, ¿no? En orden. Por eso es que ya se pasaban haciendo esto, no la pedía.
Vamos a ver, porque ahora esta tarea es un poquito más difícil.
Well, this is a more difficult task. Let me introduce them.
Este teléfono mío. Bueno, vamos a presentar a las artistas puertorriqueñas que harán parte.
Let's introduce the Puerto Rican artists who will speak in this panel, inspired in an exhibition project in Puerto Rico, and also which is their participation in the Biennial, a very beautiful exhibition at the Museum of Universal Art in the ground floor of the Universal Art building of the Fine Arts Museum. Anaida Hernandez questions the notions of patriarchy, equity, gender, and equality with a subversive bias. Her artistic praxis talks about the transformation of power, equity, and human rights and gender rights to bring about change. Anaida has lived in Mexico, New York, and Puerto Rico, where she currently lives, studied a master's course in UNAM, Mexico back in the 1970s, and then she joined the group of artists women of Puerto Rico in the 1980s before she moved to New York in the 1990s, which helped her shape her career. She has taken part in international exhibitions like the Havana Biennial of 1994 and now 2024, the selection of the Havana Biennial in Germany in 1994, the Biennial of Cuenca, Ecuador in 1995, the Biennial of Santo Domingo in 1990, the Ibero-American Biennial of Mexico in 1997. She has made solo exhibitions in 1999 in New York, in the Puerto Rico Art Museum in 2004, in the Contemporary and Design Museum of Costa Rica in 1995, in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Puerto Rico in 2010, and in the Museum of the OAS in Washington in 2007, and in the Lima Art Gallery of Bronx. Her work is part of collection of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the World Bank's collection, Washington, D.C., the Museum of the OIS in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Art of Puerto Rico, and the Museum of Contemporary Art of Puerto Rico. She's joined by Esa Maria Melendez, who was born in Caguas, Puerto Rico in 1974. Has a 28-year career. She has made over 36 exhibitions in Puerto Rico, the U.S., Uruguay, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Ireland. She was recently awarded a Grant Established Artist as part of the first tendering program. And in 2023, she was awarded and won the People's Award in the Gallery of Portraits of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. She was invited by the Puerto Rican Culture Institute to hold an exhibition, a mid-career exhibition, which is tantrum to the argument. Her work is Royal Museum of Art in New Orleans, and Museum of Anthropology of the University of Puerto Rico, Museum of Contemporary Art of Puerto Rico, the House of the Americas in Havana, Museum of Art of Ponce, and Museum of Cagua, among others. I will now introduce Sarabel Santos. She was born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico in 1984. She's a visual artist, professor, and museologist. She studies nature through the social, political, and ecological territories. She got a master's degree in the Maryland Institute College of Arts of Baltimore, a master's in museum studies of the Caribbean, University of Puerto Rico, a bachelor's degree in painting and art history in the University of Puerto Rico, and she studied also in the Ortega and Gasset Foundation. She's the director of the Museum of Art of Bayamon, Puerto Rico. And I will now introduce Emilia Quiñones Ota, former professor and curator from Puerto Rico. She has a PhD of the University of Valencia, Spain, which she got in 2014. She's an associate professor of the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West, and she's the director of humanities of this university. She has worked as advisor and coordinator in educational aspects related to contemporary art and museology. Well, with these very powerful women, I will join the audience and I will come back in a while because their prestige precedes them. So the floor is all yours. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy and very honored to take part for the second time in a Havana Biennial to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Biennial. I would like to thank the organizers of this Biennial, and echoing Michelle, this is the first Biennial I took part back in 1994. For me, it was very important. The work, which was an installation, a large installation that then traveled to Germany with the selection of the Havana Biennial that was shown in Germany. It also traveled to Costa Rica, the request of Eugenia Perez Gaton. It traveled to the United States, several places in the U.S., New York, and other cities, and then came back to Puerto Rico and is now in the Museum of Art of Puerto Rico. So this biennial for me has been crucial and continues to be significant. I would like to thank Jorge Fernandez, director of the Fine Arts Museum, curator of the exhibition in which we exhibit our work. I would like to thank my dear friend Jose Manuel Noceda, curator, and my whom with I discussed all the details of the installation, and I apologize with Jorge for all the headaches I've caused them. I also thank all the staff of the museum who always helped us in our work. I would like to thank two young art students, future art historians of the University of Havana, who helped me out all the time. They not only helped me, but the entire team to ensure that the installation could be ready for the opening. We did a performance with the installation. I also would like to thank the girls, the future art historians from the University of Havana. I also would like to thank Emilia Quiñones, my curator of this exhibition, who this exhibition was also exhibited in Puerto Rico in early January this year. And I would like to thank and express my recognition to this group of Puerto Rican women who accompanied Elsa Maria. And I especially would like to thank this artist, Edward Milton Sanchez, who was with me preparing the installation, and he took over the installation and made it his own, and he was the protagonist. So if you go and check out the exhibition now, the installation is completed, and the installation lasted from the opening of the exhibition until 2 days later. So it took 3 days to complete the installation. It was quite a challenge. Maria Esther Ramirez Soto, 1962, 1990, 28 years old. Ángeles Medina Lugo, 1950 to 1990, 40 years old. Divina E. Pacheco, Santiago, 1928 to 1990, 62 years old. These are the first 3 names documented in our exhibition of women killed in Puerto Rico from 1990 and June 1993 due to male chauvinist violence, gender violence. In 1990 was the year in which Law 54 was enacted in Puerto Rico against gender violence in Puerto Rico, and gender violence was considered a crime and not as a passionate crime, because in the past, if a man killed his wife, he only served 3 years sentence imprisonment. But now with the new law, they can have a sentence of 15, 22 life sentence. Until Death Do Us Part is a memorial that for the first time documented gender violence of 100 women killed in Puerto Rico from 1990 to 1993. It is an art installation of 100 niche paintings, which was exhibited for the first time in the Puerto Rican capital in 1994 and in the Fine Arts Museum of Havana in the 5th Biennial of Havana. It was then shown in Germany, Costa Rica, New York, Puerto Rico, and it was traveling for 10 years and showcased in 7 countries, 5 countries, 7 cities, 9 museums and galleries and cultural centers until it came back to Puerto Rico, where it is now placed. PRR, power, resistance, rebellion, is an installation of painting and sculptures exhibited in the halls of Universal Art of the National Fine Arts Museum of Cuba for the 15th Havana Biennial and marks the 30th anniversary of the installation Till Death Do Us Part, and celebrates the achievements of women in these 30 years. This installation is a reaction to a world that is burning with confusion and violence. It is a metaphor of power, of what's female in the fight for gender equity, human rights, and for a better world and peace. It celebrates rebellion against oppression against women. It's a tribute to women's resistance and of wise and strong women. It represents the liberating transformation of the role of women in the present as a result of the long decades of struggle. This exhibition is made up of a set of 53 pieces, including a large format painting, 38 sculptures, and a mobile of 15 pieces. But the curator and I decided to not to include it at the last minute because we deemed it was not necessary. The painting that is called Rebellion recreates a battle between owls in Puerto Rico. Are female owls, mocaras, which are the representation of the resistance and power of women, and vultures is a fight, or guaraguaos, as we call them in Puerto Rico, who stalk them and represent the strength of the darkness that surrounds the patriarchal system and colonial power. The birds, fish, plants, flowers spring from the painting and are transformed in a different scenario. And a fantastic mural of sculptures in relief, which create a vibrant and live environment in which birds are and vultures are also released. I am not comfortable talking about my own work, so I will let the experts speak. And I will now talk a bit about the technique I used for those pieces. I've always been interested in research and experimentation, and back in the 1980s, I started using oil mixed with other materials like cement, marble dust, and other industrial materials, which allowed me to abandon traditional methods and instead of using paint brushes, and I was able to distance myself from the conventional artistic methods. The word amalgamation means to put together, and that was the name or the term I coined to describe the technique I've developed for decades. It is a paste combining different industrial construction materials like cement, sand, lime, mineral dust, brick dust, fiberglass, and earth. The structure of the 3D pieces were built using polystyrene foam, styrofoam, which is, you know, the white synthetic material, which is very easy to handle and light, and this mixture is applied over the support, and I sand, carve, print, paint, and draw, and this creates a light yet resistant surface rich in texture and color. This polystyrene foam was used by the French artist Jean de Buffet to create his sculptures, and currently many sculptures are using this material for monumental sculptures. I am now experimenting with those materials. The pieces that came from Miami in a box. We don't know what happened with that box. And most of the pieces arrived broken, although they are very resistant. I don't know, because the pieces were shipped to Santiago and they came from Santiago to Havana, and many of them were broken, perhaps due to the earthquake. I was not able to restore them because I don't restore, but I was able to fix them and showcase them. To conclude, I want to quote a few words by Ana Maria Matute. The world has to be, you have to make your own world. You have to create steps for you to climb, to take you out of the pit. You have to invent life, because otherwise it will be true. Because if you invent life, then it will be true.
Buenas tardes. Ay, perdón. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I must join Anaida in the protocol welcome greeting. I want to thank Jorge Fernandez, Jose Manuel Noceda, the curators of the project in which we are part. I also want to say that it is an honor for me to be here and to present my work at the Biennial, and of being able to address you. I thank all the persons who have made this possible, particularly the curators. A very complicated process. They were very patient. I want to also express my solidarity with the Cuban people. For me, it's an honor to share this panel with these distinguished friends and colleagues, particularly Anaida Hernandez. I know her works. Since I was a student, she has been one of my references. And what happened in this biennial is one of the best examples. Her discipline, her patience, her serenity. This has been a school. Anaida has been a school for me. I also want to thank my Boricua delegation. Without them, we would not have been able to complete my work. Victor Sanchez and Ena Cardona. Thank you for being here. Today I want to talk about the work in this biennial, and I want to tell you about a little bit about my work. If I add what I've done in the last 27 years, I would use two words: count and transform. I count stories of my country and of the human condition. In each work, there is an intangible emotional work, and that is what transformation is all about. It's a noble material so that meaning will not stagnate. The narrative sometimes is dense, particularly because of me, because I continue complicating it. The context and the characteristics of my environment are part of this. My fascination for sowing seeds that I help to grow, the big palm trees. I replicate the forms that surround me and give me strength. The Island of Nostalgia is a work I brought to the Havana Biennial. I began working on in 2020 before the pandemic. It's part of a series of embroideries that I did last year, my first exhibition in a US museum. The title is I Come From a Complicated Island. I added some elements for the space in the Universal Art Hall, where I share space with marvelous artists, and it was a surprise for me to find them here. The piece is an embroidery on linen. It has second-hand socks that I compiled from friends and family. They talk about the colonial relation between Puerto Rico and the United States, the struggle for human rights, the decolonization of the body, and the conflicts between private and public regarding women and its autonomy. I use textile to create organic and metamorphic forms that become political declarations or statements. Printed textile or embroidered textile is part of my visual book vocabulary. Dominating this technique is important. I try to show the strength of the materials I use working with unconventional techniques. I use self-image so that my work is placed in the social context. I can battle with my own fears, and adding my self-portrait is also to talk about my intimacy without seeing my history. I put my face to tell many, many stories of many other women. Any story charged with the urgency of saying, of growing up, and that is why the work is also vulnerable. It's the reflection action when you have to, while doing my work, I sue the present. In the island of nostalgies, the figure of women represents the matron of the family. I highlight the image of women against all conventionalism, those who trivialize and banalize the body. Educating a child is very difficult. In the island of nostalgia, I claim my own body, and I also claim the sovereignty of our territory. The economic, social, political, and geographic borders of Puerto Rico, we have tensions that have an impact in the way in which we think and see ourselves as a nation. Puerto Rico, like Cuba, was a colony of Spain for 400 years. For 126 years, we are the colony of the United States. Under that status, we have a dependence that does not allow us to achieve our or materialize our potentials. My work has the coherence of an ongoing process. What the party does in Puerto Rico by the party in power is destroyed by the next party in power. So we are divided in fragments by each Puerto Rican governor represents the interest of the metropolis. With the materials of my installation, I wonder about the construction of the subject in its relation with the collective. I use second-hand socks as a metaphor. They become socks that I sew and fill in, giving a sense of lost and nostalgia. Identities that are in constant dispute in building the body and disrupting the thoughts. The concept of this work emerged when I found the socks of my son when he left for the United States to study at the university. So this economic crisis has meant many Puerto Ricans leaving the country. Puerto Rico is limited in its economic autonomous growth due to bills and taxes or fiscal policies. Insubordinated body is challenging the colonizer. I conceive art as the driver for freedom and liberty. Art has saved me from falling, and when I fall, it stands me up. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sara Vélez Santo Negron. For me, it's a great pleasure to coincide with all of you in this great celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Havana Biennial in its 15th edition under the title Shared Horizons. I'm honored to be part of this panel. It is a great opportunity to share with Anaida Hernandez and Elsa Maria Melendez, who have been invited to participate in this biennial. I'm a great admirer of their works as artists and as women. I titled this brief reflection, Challenging Silence, Celebration and Resistance in the work of Anaida Hernandez and Elsa Maria Melendez. I became familiar with Anaida Hernandez's work when I was only 16 years old, and I was a student at the Fine Arts School. My teacher, Olga Sanchez, showed me Anaida's work. Till then, I had never been exposed to such an artistic and visual content that claimed equality for women in Puerto Rico, that pointed out gender violence and questioned its standardization with the tradition of obedience and silence that we are taught as women. this terrible problem from one generation to another that could be the destiny that we as women may have as in the Puerto Rican society. This was encouraged by the conservative premise that women is inferior to men. However, Anaida gave us a key to a change of that potential destiny. And that was the announcement of 100 women between 1990 and 1993 through art. Effective aesthetic, the objects, the word, the color, the composition, and the experience of her work. A very intelligent and sensitive manner to raise the voice of so many women that could not talk anymore, with no other sound but the scream of an art made by a woman. According to statistics, till September 2024, there have been 16 murders, 820 sexual crime, 6,020 prohibitions, and more than 6,000 domestic violence incidents. All this is what has been reported. We don't have here the other violent actions that are not reported. Today, more than ever, we understand that violence against women is a problem of public health and human rights. 30 years after Anaida Hernandez's work, Till Death Do Us Part, the work I have been talking about that was exhibited at a Havana Biennial in 1994, the right of women to live free of violence is still persecuted. Recent studies show that physical violence is tolerated or even defended by laws, institutions, and community rules. Other researchers state that violence against women can be not only a manifestation of gender inequality, but also a manner of imposing this gender inequality. This means that we still have a long way to go and much to build and rebuild. Art is a way of making and proposing. That is why Anaida presents in this new edition a body work that claims what has been or celebrates what has been achieved and what we still have to do. These are paintings and sculptures that are quite distinctive of her work. Unequivocal metaphors of the many life experiences that the artist has. I take into consideration concept and emotions for a more balanced art. There is a representation of hands symbolizing the clear-cut expression of the inner state of human beings, the attitude of the spirit when the person does not speak. Flowers is an image of the soul and invites to enjoy life, and the birds of native birds of Puerto Rico. All this invites us to visualize a different present and an optimistic future. To celebrate means that we are alive, that we can promote, inspire, and show solidarity with this cause. 8 years after that first encounter, I knew or became familiar with Elsa Maria Menendez's work. She not only worked or addressed the theme of violence against women She used body as a signal, and the self-portrait body also. Nelson Rivera, the Puerto Rican writer, says that when doing a self-portrait, the artist solves two things. The first, exploring who I am, where he or she exposes his or her intimacy, and the second, what is art? Then this is as aesthetic and psychical undressing of the person. When you reveal the body of the woman and the artist to propose other decolonial narratives far from the consumption, erotic look or concept. The body is undoubtedly a battlefield, and it has a value in today's culture. It's a source of information that provides ongoing and permanent definitions. Why do we have this body? The body is a political territory, sorry. And in Elsa Maria Melendez's works, presented with great humor and sometimes with sadness, she explores the social, political, and economic problems of the Puerto Rico we live in. She also addresses the language and the word and the judgment about a woman's body and its sexuality to reveal herself. She uses an instrument that is linked to housewife chores, sewing, the action of the needle and the thread on the fabric, the, what denounces the laws and patriarchal ideologies and systematic violence. This is what happens in the work exhibited at this biennial, the Island of Nostalgia. The self-portrait of the artist embroidered with threads looking at us sadly. Her bare breasts remembering us about maternity. A skirt covers the rest of her body and the socks of her son. Among the many socks she collected, it's the absence of the child that leaves to study or to work or looking for opportunities you can't find in the country. As she said, the empty nest. This time we are the children of the land that saw us trying to seek a better future. It's the earth with all the steps of the community, of the people, a symbol of migration. How much can that skirt grow? The body is never separated from society nor inhabitants from their land. They are the reflection of their land, and they are united by that. So, Puerto Rico's economic situation and lack of opportunities are actions that hinder our sense of freedom and security. In 2012, the Puerto Rican government adopted the Law 60 to encourage foreign investors to come to the island to do business with incomes or with tax incentives. This has brought about difficulties for the autochthonous economy, for the development of an autochthonous economy. There has been problems regarding access to houses, particularly for working women. It's very difficult to live and prosper in your own land. That is why sometimes people have to leave. The resistance with which Elsa Maria is associated with is that the land looks at us in an attempt to develop a consciousness to promote a change in this story or history that is repeated again and again. To conclude, the work of Analia Hernandez and Elsa Maria Melende is an answer to patriarchal systems and legislative and political structures in Puerto Rico. Through their own lives, they propose the celebration, visibilization, and social justice for women and for the homeland. They advocate for vindicating power over the body, the territory, equity, and prospective education by exploring their identity and the collective identity through space, symbolism, collective memory, and the social and political conditions. This brings us back to a critical reflection on the need to transform our thinking in pursuit of a more or a more just and equitable society. Let's celebrate the works of these two great women that have maintained their work as artists, as relentless workers, as we have seen in this biennial, as sisters, friends, mothers, teachers, professors, visionary, whose work invite us to redefine us using the power of art. Thank you.
I would like to echo the words of my colleagues in thanking the organizers of the biennial and this theoretic event, and Dani Montes de Oca for moderating our panel. The first work of art that explores the topic of gender violence to denounce it, created in the entire world, was done by Latin American artists. The piece is called A Few Little Cuts and was painted by Frida Kahlo in 1935. I want to apologize before I start. For several reasons, I wasn't able to make a presentation with images, and I'm going to refer to works that everybody has seen, and some are exhibited in this biennial. In 1610, this was not as a denounce like Frida Kahlo. Since the creation of this piece in 1935, Latin American and Caribbean female artists have led the creation of work that address gender violence to try to understand this phenomenon. This is partly due to the fact that we have one of the highest rates of feminicides and gender violence in the world, and also due to the tradition of demonstrations and protesting of our region, countering the empires of Spain first and then the US. The artist is a pioneer in addressing this issue. As it's been said on several occasions, and Yolanda said earlier this morning and has been said in this panel. In 1994, she created the piece, the large format piece, Till Death Do Us Part, which is sort of an altar for the women who were killed by their partners or former partners in Puerto Rico from 1990 to 1993. And that was presented to the 5th Biennial of Havana. The women that Anaida helps us recall and remind in this altar were the first 100 persons killed after the law enacted in 1999 to prevent domestic violence and counter domestic violence in Puerto Rico. There was a pioneering law in Latin America and was the result of struggle of feminist women who took to the streets for years for this to be achieved. This was not a gift of the government. Before the law, the murders of women due to gender violence were not separate from the rest of murders in statistics. Therefore, many women had been killed by their partners before the law 54 was enacted, but learning how many were killed was difficult. In their work, Hernandez named them all and found out all their names and last names to remind us that they were not numbers or statistics, but human beings whose lives was curtailed by someone who thought that that woman was their private property and therefore could take their life as when they pleased. In 2014, in my doctoral thesis in the University of Valencia, I made reference to the huge steps forwards of Latin American Caribbean women to give voice to what cannot be mentioned. Ana Mendieta, who was taken to the United States against her will, was one of the first artists in the world to speak up about violation as a feminist issue back in 1973 when she created a number of works of art about the topic, rape, sing, and rape. In 1969, Jorge Sanginés, a Bolivian film director, filmed the film Jaguar Malco about forced sterilization of indigenous women in Bolivia by healthcare and U.S. healthcare institutions and charities. And in 1982, Ana Maria Garcia, a Cuban filmmaker based in Puerto Rico, recorded the documentary feature, The Operation, exposing the atrocities the U.S. government has subjected women from 1940 onwards. She explored up to 1982, but actually that exploitation continued to the 1990s. Also sterilizing Puerto Rican women against their will and testing the first contraceptive pills in the bodies of Puerto Rican women before they were approved by the FDA for the U.S. market. All these artists have unveiled problems that were not considered violent but state planning, and in the case of rape was considered an evil by men that were mentally ill and not as we see it today, at least feminists, we see it not that it is perpetrated by healthy men that live in the patriarchal system. With her work, Till Death Do Us Part, she was also a pioneer, while Ana Maria Garcia was the first to talk about gender violence, and Aida Hernandez was the first to tackle the issue of violence by partners, which is a peculiar situation that we must prevent. Today, her piece continues to be as relevant as when it was created, despite the fact that it's been 35 years of the passing of the law to prevent domestic violence in Puerto Rico. Our country continues to have one of the highest rates of women killed in Latin America when compared to the overall population. Sarabel already mentioned some stats, and we should consider that there's only 2 million people living in Puerto Rico, so the rate is high. Colonialism, we are subjected to, exacerbates the situation because people's poverty in people makes it more difficult for women to abandon homes in which they have survived violence and searching for a better future. And this situation also creates insecure men that abuse their partners when they cannot succeed in the economic or labor world. So all these women had to question their arguments. Despite 35 years of the passing of Law 54, there are still political groups of power in the Congress and Senate of Puerto Rico which still claim that violence is just one and that we should not distinguish from street violence, gender violence, and drug-related violence. These ultra-conservative positions have the ultimate goal of controlling the bodies of women, and they have proven so with other proposals or bills like the anti-abortion bill, and have reversed the gender perspective and sexual education in public schools in the education system in Puerto Rico. Caribbean women have also resisted against euthanasia, and Black and African descendant women have acknowledged that forced sterilization in the U.S., which were called vasectomy of the Mississippi, had been practiced, and legal reparations were made, although money cannot replace our ability to decide over our bodies and our right to reproduce. However, in Latin America, Bolivia, Colombia, Puerto Rico, and the French-speaking Caribbean islands, there is still no official recognition of this forced sterilization cases, and it is even denied in the official scenario. In 2010, I presented a paper where I spoke about the documentary The Operation of Ana Maria Garcia, and when I ended, the keynote speaker of the feminist conference took me aside to talk about the topic and told me very seriously and threatened me that if I was going to say that the U.S. government had undertaken a program of forced sterilizations against the Puerto Rican women, I was saying the American government was Nazi. Actually, it was you who said it, not me, because the same measures implemented by Nazi Germany back in the 1930s and 1940s were copied by similar policies that were already being discussed in the U.S. since the late 1920s. In Puerto Rico, we also found articles of opinion of Luis Muñoz Marin, who was the first Puerto Rican governor, but he wrote it using the pseudonym of Jacinto Ortega, nom de plume, and he encouraged health facilities to sterilize women, and he wrote this article as early as in 2022. Tradition can be broken, but it takes a heavy toll, which is in the Universal Art Hall of the Fine Arts Museum of Cuba. You can also find the need of Caribbean women artists to explore through images how gender violence impacts women. Tabitha Recer from French Guyana presented the piece Sugar Wars Stildom, which talks about obstetric violence related to race and sex. And this is also present in the work of other Caribbean artists from the Puerto Rican collective Nono's Grandchildren. However, on the occasion of the 15th Biennial, Ana Hernandez places vis-a-vis another reality. The work PRP, Power, Resistance, and Rebellion, although fighting against gender violence is as relevant as it was in 1994, with this work, the artist leads us to establish a dialogue for the struggle and the steps in the struggle against domestic violence and gender violence, and to celebrate women who are alive without forgetting that we live, but we must resist and struggle on a daily basis. This piece is an encounter with life itself. In the installation by Hernandez, we find a 2D idyllic landscape, and when you look around, the characters of the painting can be found around the room in a 3D format. It looks at all the beasts can escape from the painting that has resembles the magic realism, which is typical of the Caribbean, as described by Alejo Carpentier in the prologue of The Kingdom of This World. It's as if this concept comes to life in the work of the artist. Anaida saw two owls fighting in the middle of the street, something that you wouldn't believe and seems fantastic, and it's beyond credible images that we see in a surreal work. We could also link it to the animals that are found in the animals in the room. Like you can perhaps establish a link with the animal shapes that Macandal of the Kingdom of This World takes in the book. And this work also has to do with magic realism, expressions of the Caribbean of the 1940s and 1950s. We can say, for example, or establish a relation between power, rebellion, and resistance, and the jungle of Wilfredo Lam, as the artist did in his masterpiece. In the painting at the core of her installation, we found surprises in the landscape, like spiders, hands, and feet, and she invites us to think that there's people in front of us walking through the forest, but the forest is so thick that we cannot see them. The birds that are the protagonist of the piece are not a random choice. The protagonist, owls, are very powerful animals in her view. We also find the vultures that have a very specific meaning in Puerto Rico, as they represent wild capitalism that preys on the misery of a people to implement neoliberal policies that have eroded and eliminated our public system and has led us to distrust our government. Puerto Rican and American companies want to pay the 100% of the debt and the interest, and this also, the vultures in her work also remind us of the full vulture funds. And this is also a reference to the cruelty of the patriarchal system in Puerto Rico. From that viewpoint, we could see vultures as male or official power in the patriarchal system. But the owls attack the vultures, as Hernandez sees the owls as feminized animals. But all animals could be considered animals. The new piece we have in front of us embraces life, happiness, and joy. The Puerto Rican artist Elsa Maria Menendez with her piece, The Island of Nostalgia, which is also exhibited here, confronts us to an image of power from the viewpoint of a feminized body. Is the anti-victim, and it invites us to have a dialogue with the bodies of women throughout history, where the naked woman's body has been to awaken desire in men. However, her gaze and the severe or serious expression of the face does not have any erotic nuance, but invites us to discuss the contribution of women to the universal creation of objects and images through the materials she used. She used fabrics and cushion filling, and using pieces of fabric that we have used to sew blankets and fix hand-me-down clothes or tore pieces of clothes. Both works, the work by Anaida Hernandez to mark the 30th anniversary of the death till death do us part, and the 40th anniversary of the biennial, celebrate the contribution of women to society. To conclude, I would like to say that we should consider, like Yolanda Wood did earlier this morning, that female artists have been crucial in the history of Caribbean art. In the Dominican Republic, Celeste Hill, which was mentioned by Michelle in the previous panel, is one of the founders of the modernist trend that has spread all over the Caribbean. Edna Marley did not open the path to modern sculpture, but created a school that has given rise to several Caribbean and Jamaican artists. In Puerto Rico, we couldn't have such an important graphic tradition or that distincts our art from 1950s to the 1970s if we forget Irene Delano. In Cuba, one of the pioneers of concrete art in the Caribbean was also Caldevila, and also Ana Mendieta, who's considered to be one of the most important influences for the generation that has been called Volume 1. So to acknowledge the contribution of Caribbean women artists has been done, but it was important that we were to highlight it on this occasion. Thank you very much.
Bueno, estamos llegando al final.
Well, we are coming to the end of this afternoon session. If there are any comments or remarks, Yolanda, you have something to say?
Buenas tardes. No hay
Good afternoon. Sometimes you can't keep silent when you listen to polyphonic expressions like the ones we have heard today. My first words to you is my congratulations for what you do and what you say. It has been a true experience hearing to you this afternoon. A very valuable experience because it's something that is not frequent, and you have been able to achieve with harmony. It's a panel shared by artists, critics, and researchers, and this is very valuable. Not what you have, only what you have done and said, but the way in which you have done it. There is so much humanism in what you have expressed. Critic humanism, profound humanism that I appreciate from the bottom of my heart. And for our students that here listening to you, and for those of us interested on these topics, this panel should not only be the end of this session dedicated to the Caribbean, but a key source of reflection for our works and research. I congratulate you all. Thank you, Doctor. Somebody else wants to say something? Yes, my name is Daniel Alejandro Gomez Caraballo. Sorry. I'm a third-year art student. I want to thank, as you said, these great women for the experience they have provided for and to highlight the I'm very nervous, sorry. And the tranquility of Professor Adenaida, whose works had not arrived when the exhibition started today, and she was very calm. I think that this is a very important experience. I want to thank all those who work in the exhibition, Amelia, Sarabel, Melendez, And I think I represent the art students that were working with these women in this exhibition. And the tradition can be broken, but you have to pay a price. And it was undoubtedly a very touching experience. I think I speak for all these students. It was a feedback for us as future professionals. So thank you. Thank you for your support, for your patience, and for the experience you have provided to us.
Por favor.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Soy Lucy Zúñiga, soy mexicana.
I'm Zúñiga from Mexico. Anaida, Elsa Maria, Emilia, and Sarabel. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your words, for sharing these reflections on your work, for the topic, for the social and political, cultural, economic, colonial reflection. I was not here yesterday, so I'm very much looking forward to see the exhibition. It's the Universal Art Hall in the next building. Well, I want to thank you for that strength, how we can make revolution through art. Thank you very much. Somebody else wants to say something? Emilia? Aside from Maniel's comments, I wanted to add that all of us here, we learned from Anaida. We were so concerned, but we learned a lot from you and from all art students who were there helping us, taking photos, and have guided us on many things, on how the Academy works in Cuba. We have learned also a lot from you, so we want to thank you also. Well, I want to thank once again the panel, the organizers, for the possibility of moderating this panel. It was very moving and touching for me, not only because a topic on which I have been working for many years, but because I have strong links with the Wilfredo Lam Center and the Havana Biennial. I have been organizing the theoretical event for many years. I was very happy to hear the art students, because we always think about the experts, the artists who are coming, but we also think about the art students, an opportunity for them to receive first-hand information that otherwise they could not have. I was trained in the first Havana Biennials in the theoretical events when I was an art student, and it's something that I take with me in my professional life, in my emotions and my personal sentiments. 30, 40, 50, 60 years of silence of women is nothing compared. 30, 40, 50 of talking about being subjected to silence is nothing compared to the centuries that we have been accumulating experiences and knowledge, and receiving feedback like in a mysterious sect in which we are passing information from one to another, understanding each other. So I am confident on the art of women, particularly the women present here today, and the potentials of female art. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon, and I hope you continue enjoying the biennial. Thank you.
Bellísima, necesaria para nuestro crecimiento. Danis, vente para tomarnos una foto. ¿Nos paramos o nos quedamos sentadas? Ok, cabemos.
¿Esto no molesta? ¿Las botellas de agua?
Se ve más profesional con la botella.
¿Nos paramos? ¿Así te sientas? ¿Me das un
Ah, pues si todo el mundo se va a sentar, yo me siento entonces.